Hello, Dungeons and Dragons players. This is another one of my introduction videos, but this video is going to introduce the Pantheons of my continent Syston for our second campaign of 2020 for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. Now, religion exists in role-playing games, and different groups will have a different level of emphasis on it. But one of the things that can be a hurdle for new players to get over is how these religions work. And part of the reason is Dungeons and Dragons, taken as a whole, is a massive mashup. You have a Renaissance society and heroes running around in it with medieval weapons, but on top of all this, they layer on a very large polytheistic religious system that looks much more like ancient Greece than Western Europe and England, which a lot of Dungeons and Dragons has taken its roots from. And trying to explain to new players about how these pantheons work and the role of characters in them is really kind of a hurdle, because there are, in the official D&D 5th edition, there can be as many as 2 or 3 dozen different religious entities that could all be in play. You'll have human deities and dwarf deities and elf deities, and they cover a lot of the same ground. So as a dungeon master, I was trying to figure out, how do I simplify this for newish players, that they're not having to pull out a religious backup guide to explain who are these people, what's this going on. So what I did is I simplified the Pantheon. It is still polytheistic, but it's now 9 major figures, largely derived from the Dragonlance D&D campaign setting. That is a Dungeons & Dragons setting that was created in the late 80s, early 90s. It's one of the first sort of novel D&D books that I really fell in love with when I was a late teenager. So I'm going to pay homage to them and use simplified versions of their pantheon. And those 9 major figures are built around alignments, expected behaviors for somebody in that particular, follow within this pantheon and following a particular deity. I also clarify the relationship between warlocks and hexblades the way I see them in this video, and I'll explain that here in a little while. First, though, we could start off with the gods of good, paladine, lawful good, this is the deity of rulers, laws, guardians. We're going to follow the rules. We're going to make the world a better place through those laws. Then there's neutral good, Branshala. That is the deity of music, art, and beauty. And last, on the good end of the spectrum, is Chiseler, the chaotic good. They are the deity of love, nature, and animals. Again, all of these are going to see that the world is a good place. There are things that can be, and fighting evil. Then there are the gods of neutrality. And so neither good nor evil, somewhere in between. There is lawful neutral first, and that is Shannare, deity of wealth, commerce, and trade. To do commerce and trade, you need laws by it. Good or evil, too many times, and you'll get the evil corporation ideas. True neutral, right down the middle, is reorcs. They are the deity of crafting, smithing, and tinkering. The actual process of creation in and of itself isn't good or evil, but how those objects are used afterward might be. Last but not least in neutrality is Syrian, chaotic neutral. This is a deity of change, fire, and gambling. A randomness aspect to it. Now, last but not least in this simplified pantheon are the gods of evil. The one that's famous from the Dragonlance setting is Takhisis, the lawful evil queen of the dragons. She is the deity of night, hatred, and slavery. Those novels were much of her attempts to return to the mortal world. Neutral evil is Zebo. That is a deity of storms, the sea, and war. Last but not least, chaotic evil, the deity Chemarsh, deity of undead, disease, and calamity. So, if you make up a character who is lawful good, you should probably be following Paladine. If you create a true neutral character, you would be following Riorts. Again, this simplifies the religious orders that you will find throughout these adventures and realms. And all faiths in D&D, and why is this important, is you will have institutions of them. You will find shrines and temples and cathedrals and mosques and everything and anything else to many of these deities. But within these orders, you will find there's lots of not-adventuring members. You will find preachers and healers, laypersons, etc., throughout these realms. Then you have clerics and paladins, and to me the difference between clerics and paladins is how much emphasis you want on spells and spellcasting versus how much on arms and armor. Paladins are the arms and armor. You could have a cleric and a paladin of, say in this case, Chiseler, chaotic good. The cleric, they both have the same ends, but the paladin will be using the sword arm, the battle axe, to achieve the ends, where clerics will be using more of their words and spells to advance things along. Now, the second thing of this is to deal with warlocks. Warlocks as a class are famous in literature. Warlocks make deals with some greater outside entity. The story of Faust, if you want a music example, The Devil Went Down to Georgia would be an example of this sort of warlock behavior in country music. Now, who signs up for these sorts of agreements? There's lots of possibilities who show up. 5 of them make logical sense to me. The Archfey, Mother Nature, effectively. The Celestial, angels coming down to say we need a champion in these realms. The Fiend, well, if you're going to have angels showing up, you're going to have devils and demons showing up as well, offering things. The Great Old One, this is really one more clear from Game of Thrones, ancient things beyond human recognition or beyond mortal memory coming back. The Undying, you get into much sort of the undead. To use the Star Wars, this is the story of Darth Plagueis, somebody who could postpone death. Now, these 5 to me are all pretty clear. The 6th one is what is called the Hexblade. The Hexblade of this level is basically a very martial character. They're designed for more mixing it up with the bad guys in hand-to-hand combat, fisticuffs, and the like. But the trouble is, having a Hexblade at this level doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. To say that there's some great martial power beyond our plane of existence never really sat right with me. So for my campaign and my flavor, what I have done is the Hexblade is still separate. You still take all of that from the player's handbook and Xanthar's Guide to Everything. But each of the previous 5, because they're much more clear, will have both warlocks and hexblades. This can be thought of in the same derivative as the clerics and paladins of other pantheons. Warlocks, to me, are a little more spellcasters. They're more Harry Potter, whereas the Hexblade is more martial. They're going to mix it up in hand-to-hand combat. So you will find warlocks and hexblades for each of the other 5 major groupings. So you'll have, as you see, warlocks and hexblades for the Archfey, warlocks and hexblades for the Celestial, warlocks, hexblades for the Fiend, and so on. None of the rules change, but this to me makes more logical sense. A Celestial who comes down and says, I need heroes to protect this realm from the Fiend, We'll find those who are better with martial weapons and create hexblades, and those who are better spellcasters and create warlocks. But this really is just more flavor for my campaign rather than practical, any kind of major rewriting of the classes. And that explains the Pantheons and warlocks in my Dungeons & Dragons setting of Syston.